Good morning. Good to see everyone. Brave folks, braved the weather today. Nice. Thank you. I'm Jeff Moorad, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here for what we think is the 13th symposium that we put on. I was arguing last night that we should use Roman numerals or something, but we haven't yet. So for the time being, we're extremely proud to host this symposium each year. I started the Sports Law Center 13 years ago, worked with the then Dean, John Gotanda, and together we made my dream of creating a center for the study of sports law a reality. And when I went to law school a long time ago, maybe some of you did too, maybe not most, but there wasn't such a thing as sports law. As a matter of fact, you had to search for an entertainment law class back in those early days, and the idea of sports and entertainment finally began to creep its way into various programs, and eventually programs like this inspired a more direct study of sports law. So I'm thrilled with the progress of the center over the years. Much of that credit goes to Andrew Brandt, who I'm going to introduce next, who's our executive director and frankly could be doing a lot of other interesting things in the world, but thankfully stays here at Villanova to help us, and I'm thrilled that he does. I wanted to thank Morgan Lewis, which is a law firm that I'm affiliated with. So are a number of our panelists today for their ongoing sponsorship. This is, I believe, the 7th year that they've sponsored this symposium, and couldn't be prouder than to have a firm that I hire often and also am affiliated with be our sponsor. So thank you to Morgan Lewis. I also want to thank the students and the Villanova community, which supports this symposium each year. Dean Alexander, who's been just an incredible strength as it relates to allowing this symposium and the sports law program to move along as it has. He's out of town today doing the business that he does as dean, but there are many behind the scenes, whether it's Samantha or whether it's any number of the students who are involved in the various groupings in the sports law program. They look at this symposium with much pride, and as I do. So I thank them for their support as well. And by the way, we really do it for the students. Now, I know there are a few of you that are probably here for other reasons, like maybe CLE credit or something. I'll make sure I register for my own too. But the fact is, we appreciate you all getting up on a Friday morning and making it over to the law school, and now look forward to showing you a program that's focused on sports investing. It's an area that I'm involved with in my own life. I have a firm called MSP Sports Capital, which you'll hear about a little later. But the fact is, just as we look for disciplined investments in the sports industry, there's a plethora of firms that do the same thing today. And we're going to take a look at some of them, some of the people who are involved, and some of the people who are inspiring those particular investments. Before we do that, I want to introduce the executive director, Andrew Brandt, who John Gotanda and I hired 13 years ago because we learned that he had just returned from the Green Bay Packers, where he was the assistant GM and was living a mile or two from the campus. And we reached out to him and said, hey, I know you're teaching at Penn, but we'd love to shift your focus a bit. And we were successful at doing that, thankfully. And Andrew's been on board for 13 years and in fact is the anchor of this program. So with no further ado, Andrew Brandt.
Thank you so much. As Jeff said, Thanks for everyone coming out on this rainy morning. We're going to make it a interesting, informative, educational morning for you while the rain goes on outside. We have done this every year, as you know, and I see a lot of you that do come every year. I really appreciate that. It's a testament to Jeff, to myself, to our program. We're going to feature some of our star students today. The topic we came up with for 2025, as you see, money. Right? Funding the future, so sports investment, and then, of course, NIL in the new world of college sports. But our first two panels, 2/3 of the morning, will be about sports finance, sports investing, private equity, sports as an asset class. We have a wonderful two panels of thought leaders in the industry, bankers, lawyers, investors, of all types. I think you'll enjoy it, and I hope you will. Just some housekeeping notes. We have seats up front. If people are in the back or congregate, we can squeeze in. We have enough seats for people to all have a seat. So if someone pushes you over, no problem. Squeeze in. And the other thing, you on your seats, you see, as I mentioned, our third panel today about name, image, likeness, the most changing aspect of sports law, sports business there is right now. We work all year on something called the Brandt Report. Every year is a different topic. It's a white paper that dives deep into the topic. This year's topic is the House settlement, which is changing, we think, the structure, the resemblance, the format, the economics of student athletes in this changing landscape, what has been called the Wild West the past 4 years. Some recognition, the leader of our Brandt Report this year is Brianne Quinlan. She's over here. I just want you all to note her. Without further ado, we'll bring up the first panel. As they come up, I'll introduce them. You guys can sit wherever you like. Just a quick intro, and then I'll let them talk more about themselves. We have Steve Graham, the CEO and Senior Managing Principal at Graham Partners. A lot of you in the Philadelphia area know about Steve Graham. We have Wayne Kimmel, longtime friend of mine who's been a great friend of this program, the Managing Partner at 76 Capital. We have Andrew White from Morgan Lewis, our sponsor today, who's done an extraordinary number of deals in this space. We have Susie Cirilli, the founder of Cirilli LLC, with us, and maybe someone who needs no introduction, Connor Barwin, longtime Philadelphia Eagle, that is not only still with the Eagles, head of football and strategy, but is an investor that we'll hear a lot about in different sports. So welcome the panel. And I'll let Jeff start the questions.
All right, here we go. So thank you all for being here today. We very much appreciate it. And I think to start off, we'd love to hear, first of all, I got to get out of your way, but aside from that, we'd love to hear your own, kind of initial perspective on sports investing, kind of the new era of, call it sports as an asset class, and how that's touched your lives. If at all, and if not, we'll figure it out.
I guess I'll start quickly. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here this morning. I think as a player, played in college, played in the NFL for 10 years, I always, was excited about being involved in sports, saw, the value that was being created, and wanted to get involved. Since then, I've sort of been involved in the sports investment side. I think my early notes would be to everybody is be cautiously optimistic. It's very complicated. I think there is a lot of opportunity still there. There's going to be really, really big winners, but there's going to be a lot of losers too. I think a lot of people are losing money out there investing in sports. And I think it's just be very cautious, and you got to put together a good group as you do it. But an exciting time still to be investing in sports.
Thank you. Susie.
Hello. My world is a little different. I focus more on women's sports, and I've been a part of these discussions before, and it's a completely different animal, men's and women's sports. Lately, what's overtaken my practice in the college space is what we're talking about, is it's going to affect women and men differently. Investing in women, NIL, as it relates to men and women, I am seeing a difference, excuse me, because of what's happening with Title IX with the new administration. As it relates to the pro level, same thing. The new administration is affecting, there's been a chilling effect with corporate partnerships for my friends that are presidents of football clubs, soccer clubs, in that investing in women's sports is seen as DEI or something like that. But men's sports is seen as a good investment, whereas women's sports is seen as diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I agree with Connor's sentiment in general. There's going to be a lot of winners, and there still can be on the women's side, but it's definitely a hard time right now. Thanks for having me.
Great. We're glad you're here. Andrew White.
Thank you, everybody. Two initial observations about this space from my perspective. One, it has generally been relatively immune to everything that goes on in the marketplace. It lasted through COVID. It wasn't really affected by COVID. It really doesn't get affected that much by the marketplace because they are unique assets and they're still viewed in large part in the entire ecosystem as trophy assets. And because of that, they're the typical financial metrics that you might use to value and look at other companies and other businesses don't always apply to the assets in this ecosystem. The other thing that I would kind of just observe generally is investing in sports assets can be very different than investing in other traditional kinds of industries and companies. There are pitfalls for people who are used to investing in more traditional spaces that exist in sports that don't exist in those other spaces. So in deciding to get into the ecosystem, you have to be very, very careful because in many instances, there isn't the freedom and the flexibility that you would have in other traditional industries.
Well said. Steve.
Does this work? Yeah, so Andrew's points I think are great. At Graham, we have 8 separate private capital platforms, and one of those is going to be going initially into the sports industry. And really, to his point, we've been studying the sector. Over the course of the last year, we've been operating and investing in sports as a family for about 30 years, but all in soccer and in 6 separate verticals. And from our viewpoint, we're actually not interested in investing in sports franchises at all, although we have a big stake in the Philadelphia Union. And we're really looking at the broader ecosystem, the sports adjacencies or service businesses that are in and around the industry, youth sports, the commercial rights drop-downs and things of that nature. And so we're trying to look at, from a private equity angle, because we manage private equity funds, are there opportunities, do we really believe there are opportunities for control investing in North America in sports, but again, not in the franchise area, in the related service businesses that support the ecosystem.
Thank you. Wayne.
Well, first of all, guys, thank you for having me. Do I get extra CLEs for this as well? Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always good to get that. But it's really great to be here. I mean, the two of you have really been at the forefront of really establishing sports as an asset class. I mean, Jeff, your article that you wrote almost 10 years ago really kicked this whole thing off. Andrew, you do all the things that you do is incredible. And what we do at 76 Capital is investing across this whole asset class, really taking a look at, I mean, look, it's a $3 trillion asset class. This isn't a small little niche thing. This isn't like some different type of thing. This is a massive, massive industry from the youth side to the collegiate side to the professional side of things. And at 76 Capital, we're all about investing in the entrepreneurs who are doing the next thing, using technology, using data, using analytics to truly move the industry forward. And over the last several years, we've been very fortunate to sell companies to DraftKings, to Fubo TV, most recently to Cosm, doing really cool things. I mean, you see those pylon cams on the NFL fields. We've done those types of things. You see a lot of the investments that are sort of in the infrastructure around the sports betting industry that are making sure that everything's on the up and up. Those are the types of things that we invest in. So we're super excited about the future. We're super excited about the opportunity to truly innovate across this $1 trillion industry, $3 trillion industry, I should say. And just there's so many more people and eyes that are coming towards this that the future is really bright across sports.
Thanks, guys. I think one thing that struck me in each of your opening comments, and maybe struck a lot of our audience, was some caution, some cautionary tales, because I think there's this image of sports investment as up, 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 only one way, rocket ship. And now, of course, the $6 billion franchise price for the Celtics last couple weeks. So it's interesting to hear that some of it may be circumstances, political, societal, but we have an image of sports as only going north and only a great investment in any women's, men's, whatever it is. So I'd like to anyone to sort of, again, chime in on kind of the reality of sports investment.
Well, I would say the why sports is going up and up, and why the reality is that it's going to continue to do that. Because if you really think about it today, everybody in this world somehow is involved with sports. They either watch sports, play sports, or want their kid to be the next LeBron, Serena, or Caitlin Clark. And you'll spend any amount of money. It's what Andrew was saying earlier about the fact that this is a recession-proof industry. Regardless of what's going on Wall Street, Main Street, wherever, you're going to spend that money to get your kid that equipment, that trainer, go on to that team, take a trip somewhere that's going to cost thousands of dollars because of the chance of your kid to get that scholarship or make it to the pros someday. So we truly believe at 76 Capital that this industry is continuing to expand. It's the reason why Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, over the last year, have started investment banks in this industry. A year ago, they didn't have it. At this conference, I think the only one that had it at the time was JP Morgan. They had just opened theirs. And then Goldman followed. And now you also have CNBC following this industry, just like any other industry out there. So to really see where this $3 trillion industry is going is really going to be exciting to see how things are continue to progress. And of course, with all the disruption in college sports, which I'm sure we'll get into, the money is just continuing to come in.
Add to that, I'm going to keep talking about the women's side because that's what I'm involved in. It is up, up, up. You keep hearing about invest in women's sports. It is so important, especially the budding lawyers out here and the current lawyers, to understand the industry that you're in. In the football world, soccer world, there are structures in place that are not going to let your investment be like that of a men's team. For instance, FIFA there's training compensation. Does anyone kind of follow soccer or, no, you do? Okay. So training compensation is something that a club will get if they train up a player and sell the player overseas, right? We've seen it with the union, well done. That is prohibited on the women's side. It's in the FIFA regulations that it's not allowed on the women's side. So if you're investing in the women's sport, if a women's football club and you see Angel City or these teams that are being bought, expansion fees in the hundreds of millions, you better know that you're not going to be like the union because you don't have access to that revenue. So I love what Connor said about caution and know what you're investing in, not just because it's the shiny Caitlin Clark object. I love Caitlin Clark, love the WNBA, all of that. But you really need to know your stuff, and there are still systems in place that do not help the women's side at all. In fact, they hold it back. But you're going to see a lot of conferences, She Believes, Lean In, all that stuff. But until you change the regs and all of that, this is going to stay where it is. So the men's side will keep rocket shipping, and the women's side will keep plugging along. That's it.
I would say I'm really bullish on the women's side, and I think it's going to keep. I think it's going to keep. It's on a rocket ship, in my opinion, right now. The women's soccer and the women's basketball. But to me, I say cautiously optimistic because yes, the values on a lot of these teams continue to rise. But the costs of operating these teams continue to rise too. And as an investor, that's something I think people that aren't in the sports industry don't necessarily talk about. I mean, it's really expensive to operate these teams, and consumers and fans and players want more and more things. And so you have to be able to withstand those costs increasing over time, and you have to know that there's going to be, if you're an investor, there's a future buyer down the road, if you want the return you want to get. So I think it's just the cost of operating these teams it continues to rise.
Yeah, I guess I would say as a private equity investor, and we've been in soccer for a lot of years, 30 years. We have venue business, we have tournament business, we have a media and branding, we have a big stake in the union, and a number of other things. We're not really seeing in the soccer area, if you look at just the EBITDA minus net transfer spend minus CapEx, there's virtually no professional team in the world which is actually generating positive cash flow. Certainly not in North America, and really if you go through the European landscape. So for us, whether it's soccer or some of the other sports, we're unlikely to be pursuing franchise interests, and we'd rather be selling the picks and the shovels, if you will. And so that's the end of the market we're going to look at. The other thing as a private equity investor, we're always looking for control situations or situations in which we have the opportunity to really influence outcomes. That gets very difficult in the franchise game unless you end up buying a big stake in a major franchise and you're going to pay up today. But it is a huge world out there, to your point about a $3 trillion industry with, it's in North America. The youth sports landscape is big, growing, people spending a lot of money. With all the activity with the commercial rights drop-downs that you're seeing, there's plenty of opportunity. But we are cautiously spending time trying to figure out where is there an angle from the standpoint of somebody running institutional money, private equity money, where there's a real return opportunity, very different, than most of what you see in sports today, where there's a lot of, let's call it high net worth capital or very successful private investors. It's a very different thing than when you're running institutional money. So that's our angle, and we are pretty cautious about it.
I think an interesting way to look at this is how some marquee clubs, not always franchises, remember they're not franchises in the UK or Europe, they're clubs, but many clubs, owners of those clubs, Harris Blitzer, perfect example, create a grouping of clubs around their central ownership. In their case, if I recall, it was the Sixers and the Devils, and it's kind of branched out from there. So, I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth, Connor, but, as the Super Bowl champions, is your owner, or are there discussions ever? I know many NFL teams consider, broadening their footprint around the world. Is that the kind of project that your role allows you to look at? Loaded question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess I would say it's really not talking about, they're connected, obviously, winning and in sort of value. As a player, somebody's worked in the NFL, somebody's invested in Europe, I do think controlling owners need to be involved and need to understand. I think it's hard to look at sports in sort of the portfolio world and be a controller of multiple teams. I know there's ways to do it and there are success stories, but just my background, I really think these franchises, clubs are so delicate. And I mean, Andrew, I'm sure, is the politics, the information flow. If the person ultimately in charge doesn't have a handle on what's going on, it's really hard to be successful and run these things successful, and that leads to sort of winning. So I have a little bit of trouble with, the sort of the portfolio style and having multiple clubs. I know, especially in Europe, there's, and I don't understand the details of how this works, but have more information with players and sort of can use it to, put players together and have better resources from a scouting perspective. So maybe that works, but at the end of the day, I think again, these teams are so delicate and fragile that, owners controlling stakes really need to have a handle on what's going on in those teams.
Yeah, and those controlling owners can only get spread so much.
Exactly.
Yeah, great point.
And the sports are really different now. I mean, there is, a lot of people want to talk about there's crossover and, opportunity there with, different departments. But like these teams, these sports are really unique, and the athletes are really unique to each sport.
Yeah. Andrew White.
Let me take a little bit of the counter to that, because so one of the big clients that I have is Harris Blitzer. And so in David's case, in Europe, we do have a portfolio of European clubs, some successful, maybe some not as successful, but there are real synergies. We have a holding company platform, and then that holding company platform holds interest in these various Euro clubs. And there are synergies and efficiencies that can be gained in managing the portfolio of assets from a human resources perspective, from an intellectual property perspective, from a best practices perspective, from both on the sporting side and on the business side, where these clubs are sharing resources, and there are economies of scale that can be gained through the sharing of those resources. So it can work. The key is, I've seen at least, you've got to put together a really, really good senior management team to kind of oversee these various clubs. But there have been real efficiencies and economic gains through the sharing of those assets, if you will.
If I may. I agree with both of you. And to your point about how the teams are different, I'm going to talk about the women's side. Yesterday I got a football club called me they have a women's team, and they think, well, we have a men's team, we can do a women's team. It's completely different. To my point about the training compensation, you're not going to get that revenue's gone. To even from an HR employment, I'm an employment lawyer by trade, the issues you face with a female athlete versus a male athlete are different. And it's a physical job, and you're going to deal with, pregnancies and all of that. So have a great, leadership team, back office that he was talking about, and understand what Connor was talking about, that the sports are different, the genders are different. You're dealing with different beasts. You can't have a cookie cutter template to this.
I would just say for Harris Blitzer, I mean, the part that really makes sense for me, is, especially in Europe when you're dealing with promotion relegation, if you just have your eggs in one basket and that team gets relegated, you're in serious trouble. But now if you have, a handful of teams, you sort of can de-risk the whole operation a little bit when you have, multiple teams. Hopefully in one season, 3 or 4 of your teams are not all getting relegated. So that to me definitely, from a financial perspective, makes a lot of sense.
I think it's interesting. It was the conversation I had last night with some of the law students here about the professionalization of sports. And that's what we're hearing, right? We're hearing you got to have a club, you got to focus on it, and that's the only thing you could ever do. Then you have these other private equity groups and other people coming in and saying, wait a second, we could have a portfolio, of these clubs, these assets as they call them, right? They're not just clubs, they're assets. There's opportunities to actually have, have scale of across this whole asset class. So I think we're starting to see the professionalization. We're certainly starting to see that on the collegiate side as well, where presidents and athletic directors have to be business people, have to really start to think about things differently. So even as you see Mark Cuban moving out as an owner and selling the team to the Adelsons, and what was his comment about? Well, things are changing, right? We all know. If one thing, what is it? It's one of your quotes, I think, Andrew, about if something's changing. What do you say? I forget. Something about change. If there's always change. Andrew always has some comment about that. But if there's change is There's change every day, right? But that's the thing about sports. Sports is changing. It's becoming more professionalized. It's becoming in a way where you're seeing other industries are very, it's becoming like all other industries out there. And that's the part that's exciting. That's the opportunity, I think, certainly for all the students here, what it's going to look like and how your opportunity to go and run an organization in the future, because they're not going to be run, and they are not being run the way they used to be run. And that's the same thing in professional sports, college sports, and in youth sports today.
Steve mentioned the two words that we haven't really dived into yet, but have been kind of circling here, and we're going to talk about it more in the next panel as well. Those two words are private equity. So I was in the NFL, Connor knows, Jeff knows. You sit around the table and you have these individuals, like this is the face of this team, and the Jerry Joneses and Robert Krafts, et cetera. But that's not changing, but the funding behind it is. And now we have every major sports league allowing it and allowing this, I'll let you guys explain better, but this kind of faceless, nameless investment in these teams. How have you seen that develop? And now that all leagues, or even the NFL, which has been totally against it for so many years, allowing it up to 10% of franchise funding, how do you see that changing the world we're talking about now?
I think with the advent of some institutional capital coming into the professional sports industry, probably some things will get professionalized at this juncture. It's non-control capital, so it's essentially just supplementary equity. But again, if you're managing third-party capital as a fiduciary, you really have to be thinking about the return opportunity. The challenge in the professional sports club or franchise sector is, if you're an investor, you're competing against a lot of other people who are investing for non-financial reasons. And in private equity, you really, the only way you're going to stay in business if you're managing third-party money is you have to be able to generate a return. So I really like, as a private equity investor, the fact that there's so much attention around the professional end of the sports investment spectrum, because that sort of drives all the other opportunities. And that's the point I'm making. You look at the European promotion and relegation, and you look at guys that are investing in clubs. The challenge is the clubs over there are effectively community assets. The equity doesn't really actually control the equity over there. And that structure with promotion and relegation makes it sort of not really tenable, other than at the very top end with the major clubs for institutional private equity to come into the deal. So from my standpoint as a private equity investor, that's why I say it's great that there's all this, the attention, the media attention, the hype, the hyped up valuations, whether it's men's or women's in North America, around the professional spectrum. But as somebody running institutional money, we're not going to play at that end. We're going to look for other places in the ecosystem where there's an opportunity to, A, control our investments, and B, invest and get in and out of things at valuations that make sense, because otherwise we're just going to be out of business as a private equity manager.
I mean, quickly, you're talking as an investor, not someone that needs his face all over.
We have zero interest in that, and it's the picks and the shovels, the service providers, and it is a huge industry, and it's great that the professional spectrum is there, because that's what excites everybody. That's where all the media attention is, but that isn't necessarily where the private equity investment opportunity will be. Besides, finally, there's plenty of institutional private equity that are chasing the franchise interests, like the Arctos guys, and that's worked great for them. It's just not for us.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head when you mentioned community asset. And I know when I ran the Arizona Diamondbacks and then the San Diego Padres, we reminded our people every day that we really didn't own the team. We were custodians of that team. And that's the way we viewed it. And now look, there was technically ownership that ran, from us to the franchise itself. But if you focus on that, I think you lose the community asset theme. And I do think the U.S. leagues are doing a pretty good job of saving that as a bit of a sanctimonious, part of the ecosystem where, you can't buy control as a fund or as a corporate or, as institutional money. Rather, you can only buy a minority position. So that, whether it's 30% in some leagues or, 10 in the NFL, the fact is, I think that all preserves the specialness of that community asset theme. And I think it's really important, to your point, Connor, for that control owner to be the face of the franchise, wherever they are.
Yeah, I agree exactly with what you said. And then to the question, but to my point about these are becoming more and more expensive to operate, these teams, they need institutional capital, right? And I also think it's a complementary piece where they are going to be a forcing function to make sure these teams are creating value, right, for everybody. And so I think it can work. Again, there's going to be winners and losers, but there is the need for this institutional capital. You're seeing what's happened. Just an example, some numbers here. 5 years ago, expansion fees for women's soccer teams were $2 to $5 million. Andrew, correct me the year here, in 2020 or 2021, the fees jumped from $5 million to $53 million. The revenues didn't make that jump. And just a month ago, Denver won a bid, and they paid $110 million just to have a license to be in the league. The revenues have not made that jump in the last 5 years. So to the point about the financial fundamentals, they've been thrown out the window. So you have to have investors that don't care about that, but also you have to be able to have investors that are making sure there's being value created, or these leagues are really going to be in trouble down the line.
On the women's side, private equity, like 6th Street with Bay FC, they now have a collective in the UK. I mean, so for the women's sport, it's been great. And so I'm a proponent. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
No, it's very, very interesting because private equity jumping into professional sports goes against everything that those guys ever learned.
Why? Because
they apply in other industries, in other more traditional industries, they typically apply sound financial metrics to evaluate their investments. But in the sports world, not only is that not the case, because as Steve, somebody may have said, you look at the financial statements of a lot of these companies, and they don't make money, but their values just keep going up and up. So you have these private equity guys who are coming into this space in a world deciding to move forward on an investment that they would never have done before. At the same time, it's a difficult investment for them, they learn, because all of the typical control mechanisms that they would have in other companies, they don't have in this space. So they don't have control. They're subject to league overview. You've got this overlord in every one of these investments that they're not used to. In many cases, they're restricted from investing in certain businesses, which they're not used to. And in many cases, they have to agree contractually to financially backstop the teams, were the teams to require working capital that they're not used to. Yet, despite all that, they're jumping in.
The power of sports.
Right?
I don't think there's a huge influx, other than the Arctos guys taking minority stakes and a few other guys that are taking it here and there. If you really look at, and we're investors in a lot of these funds actually on the LP side. A lot of the other guys are also looking at the broader ecosystem and where's the angle from a private equity standpoint. And so while there will be institutional minority equity coming in, and that could work out fine. If you're seeing institutional private equity come in, I think they're going to be coming around the broader arena, just the way we're looking at it, and frankly have been. I mean, we love our union investment because we got into the union investment when when the expansion fee was only 30 million to get in the league. It's now 500 million and going up, and that's just the price to get in the door, the Studio 54, if you will, and then you got to build a stadium, and you got to fund a team that's going to lose money. I mean, there's not a single team in MLS that is generating positive cash flow. And yet the values keep escalating. So we certainly love it. But I think most of the institutional private equity that'll come into the sports world, I mean, unless they could really control the leagues, which isn't going to happen, okay? Unless they could really do that, most of the guys are going to look at the broader ecosystem. I'm not saying there won't be places where, Silver Lake buys a stake basically in City Football Group. There's not a lot of relegation risk at that level, or, where 6th Street, takes a position. Here they are, the Arctos guys take minority stakes and so on and so forth. But for most of the private equity guys, because you want to stay in business, you actually want to be able to raise a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth fund, and you got to generate return. Plus, you got to generate liquidity. You got to bring money back to your investors. How are you getting out? So it probably, for the most part, it's going to be some minority stakes here and there, unless the entire game changes.
Well, Steve's describing the business plan at 76 Capital and what we've been doing for the last 10 years, right? What we've been doing for the last 10 years is investing in the entrepreneurs, not on the private equity side, on the venture capital side, in the entrepreneurs who are truly innovating the overall sports industry from a tech perspective, from a data perspective, from an analytics perspective. We're looking at what's next across the sports betting world, right? Again, data, analytics, media, compliance, integrity, really coming up with what's the incredible new technologies to enable this industry to continue to go. I mean, look, if you see what's happened, we're almost about 7 years since sports betting become legal outside of the state of Nevada here in the United States. And, we had over $150 billion bet on sports last year. But we're still at only 50% of the population that has access to actually do it, even though we're at 38 states. So there's a lot of growth and there's a lot of opportunities in and around the whole sports industry, not just only owning teams, they guys that are going to go in and want to own teams. We think it's awesome. Keep buying teams, keep having the values go up. But what we can do and what our companies do is actually increase the value of those assets through the use of tech, data, and analytics to enable them to make those businesses better, to enable those teams, those clubs, to be in those franchises, to be more successful, to be able to be more profitable, just like private equity does in every other industry, where they come in and they bring in really smart people and they bring in the financial guys and the tech guys, and they'll come in and change out management and all that kind of stuff. That's great. Keep doing that. We'll provide you with the technology and the data and the analytics products to be able to go do that and then increase those values. And as Steve said, it's all about, returning capital to our investors. At 76 Capital, we're on our third sports fund now. We're really excited about what we're doing across this industry, and we're going to have 4, 5, and 6, and et cetera, because this is the focus of what we do at 76.
I have a strong point of view on how teams and clubs are valued in sports. And I'm sure, many of you in the audience and, all of you on the panel are constantly asked about this. How can these values keep going up? And I always respond, look, it's a much different answer than with traditional private equity. Why, one, these assets are valued as on a revenue basis, not on an EBITDA basis, for the most part. Secondly, in my opinion, it's all about the scarcity. They're scarcity assets. So, we're involved with McLaren Racing in Formula One. Why do those valuations continue to escalate? 1 of 10. Somebody says, why is McLaren worth X today and it was only worth, Y 10 years ago? 1 of 10. Why are the Celtics, as, one of the premier clubs in the NBA, worth $6 billion plus? 1 of 30. Why are the NFL teams worth what they are? 1 of 32. The fact is that there's a long line of people, and there's enough wealth in the world today that wants to chase ownership, maybe for reasons different than traditional PE, but in some cases because they simply believe that scarcity value is going to increase over time because, indeed, it's a scarcity asset.
And it'll be be super hard for private equity guys to get their head around that. It really is, because when you're competing against people who are investing for non-financial reasons, and you're managing institutional capital where you're held accountable to not only deploy capital but return capital, it's just going to get complicated. And so, I think as Wayne said, it's great to see the valuations accreting at the professional end where there's all the media attention and so on and so forth. But I still believe there's plenty of opportunity, whether you're at the venture stage or at the private equity stage where you're looking for more control opportunities in the broader ecosystem. And hopefully those values do continue to accrete.
But I'm not suggesting that the analysis is a non-financial analysis. I'm suggesting it's a different kind of financial analysis.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, whether you're valuing on EBITDA, cash flow, revenue, whatever, the valuation of an asset is a function of what you expect the future cash flow to be if you're investing for financial reasons. So someone is saying, hey, because of scarcity, we expect that there will be a big terminal value at the end. Even if we're making zero cash flow, we're expecting there's going to be a terminal value, and our thesis is it's because of the scarcity. I'm not sure as a private equity investor I would want to make that bet, but I hear you.
Connor, you mentioned the new franchise in the NWSL, National Women's Soccer League. Extraordinary price this week, or last month, of $110 million. Are you have some intimate knowledge there. Are you willing to share that?
Yeah, just, I'm really bullish on women's sports, specifically women's soccer. I think, before I talk about my story quickly there, my thesis is a couple of different things, but ultimately I think, to your point about scarcity, as investors, you have to be careful about, all of these leagues, all of these teams aren't going to create this scarcity value. My thesis with women's soccer was the NWSL has the chance to be the best league in the world in 5 or 10 years, or, moving forward. And that creates real long-term value, real media rights value. I think a lot of people see these startup leagues, and to me, the media revenue is not going to be there unless you become the best of the best. The reason, the MLS is not getting the sort of media rights value that the Premier League is people want to watch the best. And I always thought women's soccer in the U.S. can be that league, and that was what sort of drove me to get really involved in bringing a team to Philadelphia. That's why the NFL is where it is. It's clearly the best. The NBA is clearly the best basketball league in the world, and I'm sure everyone knows the other leagues. So I just put some caution about some of these other teams and leagues that are starting. Unless I think they can be the best in the world and have the best players in the world, I don't think it's going to drive long-term value. So, for women's soccer, I was part of putting a group together in Philadelphia to put in a bid. We were a finalist to bring a team to Philadelphia. I learned so much over the last almost 3 years putting this together. My major takeaways would be, to Andrew's point, to all of our point, it's a seller's market, so you need to have your capital. You're going to need some institutional money to do this. The fees just keep going up. And then, as investors, as running teams, the stadium is so crucial, right? Having a venue that your team can be a 1 or 2 tenant in is critical. Having a venue that you can program the rest of the season is critical. You have a team, but you also have a real estate asset that you need to drive cash flow. And if you're a women's soccer team, you've got 15 or 20 events a year. You need to put in another 150 or 200 events a year. I think an interesting conversation on the soccer side, which is interesting for people that live here in Philadelphia, was watching what's happened with the 76ers and Comcast. Can markets have 2 venues? What you're going to see in the future in the U.S., if women's soccer continues to grow, if men's soccer continues to grow, where do markets land on these soccer venues? Are there going to be 2 venues, right? Is there going to be a Union Stadium in Philadelphia and a women's stadium. In Boston, is there going to be a Boston women's team and a men's team? So it's really sort of an interesting space. A lot of it's about control. So it's sort of fascinating. What Denver won the bid. There is a professional men's team that has a stadium. Denver won the bid because they're building their own stadium or attempting to build their own stadium, so they will have control. And for that ownership group, the fundamentals don't make sense in many ways that we've talked about a lot, but they do have a venue that they can drive cash flow. And I'm sure that's the way that they're thinking of it, and that's the way the league is thinking about it. They want teams that control their stadiums, that can drive cash flow, that can reinvest in the team and continue to create value.
Do you think that's why we didn't get a team? The venue issue?
Yeah, I would say we didn't, me and my group, we did not do a good enough job figuring it out and delivering certainty to the league. And let me just say, this is so competitive. We are still working to figure that out. And, I love Philadelphia. It's a great sports town. There's great institutions and people here that were also part of our group trying to bring it. But these are massive decisions when you're talking about 20, 30 acres of land and what you're going to do with it inside, the city of Philadelphia, and you truly view it like a community asset and trying to position it to be successful long term for the whole region. These are hard things to figure out.
Susie?
If I may, so I do work, I've done work in the NWSL and USL. USL is the other league. There's a Super League. The USL, it's Division I. It's like $5 million to get in. And then there's the NWSL, also Division I. It's like hundreds of millions to get in. It's interesting. It's so great. We have to talk, by the way. I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up I played college soccer. Soccer's my thing. But to hear you speak, and then I've represented coaches in the league with coaching disputes, and I'm dealing with different clubs. It is club by club in the NWSL, and you can see the sophistication from the newer investors versus the clubs that have been around forever with the old investors. A lot of them, I'm sure you could speak to this. And then you have investors that are maybe they have the Celtics or something, and a daughter wants to run the club, like at Gotham or in Boston. And you saw the Boss Nation, we'll have to talk about that rollout, that they had a terrible rollout that said this team, something about balls. Yeah. So know your audience, know the industry that you're getting into, but I love what you're saying, Connor, about there's real money coming in. And I think back to your point that I'm going to stick to, you have to have a good front office. There's clubs like the Orlando Pride, great. The Minnesota Vikings ownership group, Wolf, yeah, they're a great club. They have two sides of the house, the Pride and Orlando City. Grant Hill's involved. They just won this year. They know what they're up to. I've dealt with other clubs where a coach, it comes down to HR. I'm representing a coach, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know football. They don't know a coaching contract, taking an international coach. It's not the NFL. It's a crazy world of soccer. So, Connor, we have to talk. We'll get a team to Philadelphia. And yeah, I think the more sophisticated the owners are, hopefully the back offices will get more professional. And then we can really raise the level of play, get training compensation for these women, and maybe we can see some real stuff happen. Thank you for...
Well, whether it's in North American soccer, whether it's on the women's side or the men's side, if you think just of the revenue streams, you have the gate, which, in these stadiums is kind of going to be fairly small for a soccer team. You have essentially some merchandising, which is going to be relatively modest for most of the soccer teams. You have sponsorship. In a market like Philadelphia, where take the Philadelphia Union, where it's the 8th or 9th choice after a bunch of the college team, that's going to be fairly modest, and so then you're left with the media component, right? And the media component isn't really there. To Connor's point, we're probably the 10th or 11th team league in the world, but I think that investors who are investing and thinking through this are sort of saying, I'm paying up because I'm making a bet that this is a long-term media rights play, and there's big money coming into the MLS. To a lesser degree, there's big money coming into NWSL. And, you know, and the question mark is MLS ever going to get to the point that it is a top 3 in the world league? At that point, you know, maybe the economics can start to work. Right now, as I said, every single MLS team is burning cash like a drunken sailor. And same with most of the European clubs in soccer. And on the women's side, although I haven't looked at the NWSL, but knowing what I know about MLS, on the women's side, so let's say you paid $100 million as an expansion fee to get in. Then you got to build a stadium. It's at least $150 million to do it, right? If not more. Okay.
More.
Yeah, could be 250. Okay, and then let's say on top of that, you're going to be burning cash for at least 5 or 6 years. So that's easily $100 million on top of that. So you're talking about $500 million plus to get into the game. And at this juncture, most of those teams are probably generating $15 to $20 million of revenue at the friggin' most. Okay, and they're burning cash. So you know, look, I'm all for it that people want to invest in this area. I just very skeptical that institutional private equity is going to want to play.
All right, as we wrap up, you have one choice to invest in sports: team, league, sports ecosystem. Where do you place your bet? Each of you, quickly.
It's easy for me. It's the sports ecosystem. It's what we do. It's the tech. It's the data. It's the analytics. That's where the future is.
What type of company?
So everything from companies that are, you know, the technology from on the field to enhance the players themselves, as well as the technology off the field, and that includes everything from, you know, being able to monetize your fans more, as well as things in and around the world of sports betting and other ways to monetize your fans.
Got it. Steve?
I like the ecosystem also, commercial rights drop-downs, which are really interesting with either leagues or teams or so on and so forth, and some of the other services businesses, just a little bit more mature than the venture stage.
Andrew?
Team.
What
Team.
What league?
NFL. It's
Well, that's an easy one.
okay. Team.
I'll take that one, too.
NWSL. NWSL.
NWSL.
NWSL.
All right, Susie.
I would do ecosystem to make sure that these players are getting what they need, and so that these clubs that already exist can thrive and the players are protected.
Yeah, I would say the NFL if I had enough money, which I don't at all, and not even close, or know people that do. I'd say it wasn't talked about, but I do agree there's real value in sort of commercial rights. I think private equity is investing at the league level across the world, which is really interesting. But for me, Philadelphia is the only top 10 market in the U.S. without a women's team. We're the number 4 market, and the top 3 markets all have multiple women's team. So, you know, clearly I would invest in Philadelphia and women's soccer, and I think, a Union-like stadium in the city of Philadelphia, you could program the hell out of it, and it would be a complimentary venue to a 70,000 seat rectangular grass field. So I think a massive opportunity in women's soccer, especially in Philadelphia.
There's 7 male professional sports teams in Philadelphia, and there's not one women's team.
I'll hit you with even better. So I have my son's 6, and my daughter's 4. My son can look up and dream about being any type of athlete he wants to. We have every male team there is in this city. My daughter doesn't have one single team to look up to or any sport to dream about being able to play. And I think that'll change. Hopefully, I'm part of changing that in the next 3 or 4 years.
I will shut up, I promise. But imagine if the Philadelphia Eagles, God bless you, Connor, were women. Imagine if there was a parade celebrating women, drinking beers, celebrating all that. And I'm an Eagles fan, but like, imagine what that would do for a society, for a community. And it's so embedded in us. It's just men, men, men. And I love it. I'm a diehard Eagles fan. It's great to sit next to you, Connor. But I'm being really honest. Just imagine if it was women, what that would do to the demographics of this room and the demographics of this panel.
What a great panel. Thank you very much.
Connor, Susie, Andrew, Steve, Wayne, thank you.